what world do you squish together the ideas of Cinderella and ballet and think, oh yes, Singing in the Rain would fit excellently here as well? Hello everyone, I hope that you are having an amazing day. My name is Emily and welcome to another episode of If the Slipper Fits. This is my series where I discuss just about any version of the Cinderella fairy tale that I can get my grubby little hands on. And I hope today is going to be a fun episode for you because we're going to the ballet! Now there have actually been a couple of different Cinderella ballets written over the years. It's not like a Sleeping Beauty or a Nutcracker situation where there's just one definitive version that keeps getting staged. This particular ballet was composed by Sergei Prokofiev between 1940 and 1944. So, almost the entirety of the Second World War. I can sympathize. Prokofiev was a Russian composer, and his other notable works include Peter and the Wolf, as well as a ballet version of Romeo and Juliet. Now, while that sounds just insane enough to work, bear in mind that while he was working on Cinderella, he was simultaneously working on a ballet version of War and Peace. Who hurt this man? The particular staging of Prokofiev's ballet that we'll be taking a look at today was performed at the Paris Opera Ballet in 1987, and it was choreographed, produced, and directed by Rudolf Nureyev. Now, I don't want this whole video to just turn into a history lesson, but I am taking the opportunity to talk at least a little bit about this guy because I know I only scratched the surface when it came to researching him for this video, and I am still fascinated by what I found and I can't hold it in. It's my show, I can do what I want. So in the most concise highlight reel that I can manage, Nureyev was born in 1938 in the Soviet Union and was pretty much a big deal in the dancing world from the get-go. He only had about a third of the dance schooling that was considered standard for the time, and yet he pretty much instantly became a principal dancer for what is now the Mariinsky Ballet right after he graduated. And his success brought him opportunities to travel outside of the Soviet Union, which made the government kind of antsy because Nureyev very much walked to the beat of his own drum. He did not like being told what to do and wasn't afraid to make it everyone else's problem. And that was very much not the ideal image that the USSR wanted to present to other countries. After KGB agents noticed him attending gay bars in Paris, they tried to trick him into returning home where he likely would have been imprisoned. But he escaped them, defected from the Soviet Union, stayed in Paris, and his career just kept climbing from there. He became one of the most highly regarded ballet dancers in the world. A very specific example, but some of you may know that the Muppet Show from the 70s did not exactly start out as the hottest ticket in town. But when Nureyev guest starred on an episode in 1978, his appearance really made it a very in vogue show to be on. And the producers never had any trouble securing guest stars after that. And Nureyev wanted to do something with Miss Piggy because he has taste. Eventually, he became the director of the Paris Opera Ballet in 1983, which is the position that we find him in for Cinderella, and he brought the company a lot of success. Unfortunately, it was also during this time where he tested positive for HIV and began his battle with AIDS. He continued to work through his illness the best he could, but ended up passing away from AIDS-related complications at the painfully young age of 54. And I'm sorry, but can we just talk about the main photo on his Wikipedia page? It was taken in 1973, but it looks like it could have come from this year. I don't know how to explain it, but the man is a time traveler. So with that background information, I'm sure you'll excuse me for out of the way, let's actually get to talking about this ballet. As usual, I will give you a brief synopsis of the story just so that we're all on the same page. However, I will have to get a little creatively vague at points. You see, usually when you go to the ballet, there will be a synopsis in your program telling you what is actually happening. Basically, reading the spark notes before you're reading the actual book. But since this is a production with a very different interpretation than the original, as you will soon see, and also one that seems to not have a lot of notoriety compared to the other works of the people involved, I do not have that official synopsis to pull from, so I will be doing the best that I can. And once that's done, we will come back and get into discussion. Allons-y! This interpretation is set in the early days of Hollywood, likely during the silent era. Cinderella is shown to have an interest in pictures by the poster she keeps by the hearth. Her stepmother and stepsisters are anxiously waiting for something and end up fighting over a scarf. They tease Cinderella even when she tries to be nice to them, and she ends up dancing a melancholic solo. Then Cinderella's father comes downstairs, obviously drunk, and she tries to take the bottle away from him but ultimately gives in. Her stepfamily pulls her away when she tries to comfort him, but as they are in the middle of an intimidating dance, a film director staggers into the house, having presumably gotten into a bicycle crash outside and hurt his leg. He somehow keeps the other family members from coming near him and instead reaches out to Cinderella for help. As she tends to his injury, he becomes very interested in her and seems to hypnotize her into briefly dancing with him. He also inflicts the rest of the family with a strange itchiness and leaves as quickly as he came. Then maids arrive with new clothes for the stepmother and stepsisters, along with a dance instructor who gives lessons to the girls. Cinderella tries to watch, but the stepmother forces her to get back to work. Once she's alone, though, she tries to perform the dance the instructor taught. Then she pulls on a set of men's clothes hanging on the coat rack and performs a more comedic dance routine. Just as she finishes, the director from before reappears and whisks her away from the house. He and the spirits of the Four Seasons dance for her, eventually giving her a makeover with a new dress, but he warns her that the transformation will only last until midnight. They also end up turning a pumpkin into a swanky car for her to ride in. The second act begins with a montage of scenes from different movies being shot at the film studio, intercut with antics from the stage manager and his assistant. The stage finally opens up to a large Art Deco set, and the stepmother and stepsisters arrive, followed by the prince character, who is simply referred to as the film star. The stepsisters are introduced to him in hopes that one of them will become his dance partner, and the instructor shows them the routine, but the film star is not impressed with either of them. As he complains to the director, Cinderella shows up, followed by several paparazzi. She's immediately introduced to the film star, and both he and the instructor are impressed with her skills. While she changes from her sparkly evening shoes to her ballet slippers, the stepmother and stepsisters try to steal them, but the instructor picks them up before they can, and he shows Cinderella the steps for the routine. The maids from craft services come in and invite everyone for a break, and while the stepsisters, stage manager, and assistant fight over what appears to be a bundle of fruit, the film star invites Cinderella for another dance. Then everyone reconvenes to actually shoot the scene, but the clock strikes midnight before they finish. Cinderella's beautiful dress changes back into her work dress, and she runs away, but drops one of her shoes in the process. Thus begins the third act, where the film star, stage manager, assistant, and the rest of the cast are in a tailspin, trying to figure out who the mystery girl could be and how to find her. The star gets the idea to look for whose foot fits the shoe, and he searches out several different talented dancers, but none of them are a match. Back at her house, Cinderella can't stop thinking about that night, possibly worried that it was all a dream until she realizes that she still has the one shoe. The stepsisters come downstairs and torment Cinderella until the stepmother rushes in and explains the film star is on his way. They then drag Cinderella out of the room so she won't have a chance to try on the shoe. The film star arrives and tries the shoe on both the stepsisters, which of course fits neither of them, and then the stepmother insists that she try it on. While everyone is distracted, either helping her or trying to pry the shoe off, Cinderella sneaks out and presents the matching shoe. The film star instantly knows she's the one he's been looking for. She's ashamed of her appearance, but it doesn't matter to him. The director arrives, and Cinderella is thrilled to see him again, thanking him for his help, and he offers her a contract. She's reluctant at first, but he gives her back her beautiful dress, and she eventually signs. Then she and the film star immediately return to shooting with another grand pas de deux. So I want to take a minute and talk about the casting before we go any further, because you may have not been able to tell in this costume, but the director, who is obviously the fairy godmother part in this adaptation, is played by Rudolf Nureyev. This was just his show from stem to stern, and I love it. I think he does a wonderful job with the character. He's graceful yet charming, silly yet mysterious, and even though this adaptation is mostly grounded in reality, the fairy godmother character still possesses magical abilities. It also adds a very interesting flavor that not only is the director on Cinderella's team and wants to help her get what she wants, but he's also on the film star's team and wants to help him find a good dance partner, and maybe even a good life partner, wink. And not only that, but in real life, Rudolf Nureyev apparently served as a mentor for both Sylvie Guillem, who plays Cinderella, and Charles Jude, who plays the film star when they were with the Paris Opera Ballet. I'm not crying, you're crying. Art imitates life. And speaking of Sylvie Guillem, the star of this show, she is also what is colloquially known in the ballet world as a big frickin' deal. Basically, she was one of the most sought-after ballerinas of the time. And watching her perform in this show, it is pretty easy to see why. This woman is liquid. She is grace personified. And she has such a different energy compared to most other leading ballerinas that I've seen. I feel like there's probably specific terms for what I'm trying to explain, and I just don't know them. But when she gets those true ballerina moments, like, she'll have a leg lifted and someone else is spinning her around, or she'll just be up on her toes for an extended period of time, she always manages to retain a softness about her. She never looks like she's posing for a camera or like she's made of porcelain. And I've not seen her dance in anything else, so I don't know if this was just intentionally directed for this character or if this is just how she dances, but I'm leaning toward the latter, honestly, just because she makes it seem so effortless. And let's not just gloss over her Chaplin-esque solo in the first act either, because let me tell you, this solo absolutely made this show for me. It was so unexpected and so charming. Like a Cinderella who does physical comedy, like get out of town. It is absolutely precious, and the end comes far too soon. I feel like there's a lot of nuance to this interpretation of the character, but because of the nature of the medium, it's a bit harder to see those exact lines where the puzzle pieces connect. And speaking of Sylvie, and also speaking of Charles Jude as well, their chemistry. Oh my god, it's so good. There's hardly any pretense between them. It's just this instant connection. I love this bit where he marches across the stage and spins her around on this stool. It's kind of everything I want, and I don't know how to explain it. They've got all of that big, classic, romantic energy that you want for what is essentially a period piece. And I love that he doesn't even let her try on the shoes after she reveals that she has the matching one. And this whole exchange after where he lifts her up and she's shy and the twirl, and God, it's just so good and soft and lovely and just, ugh. We're pretty much already there, but can we just appreciate the vibes of this performance for a moment? I know that word gets overused a lot, but it is the most apt in my opinion. I mean, in what world do you squish together the ideas of Cinderella and ballet and think, Oh yes, Singing in the Rain would fit excellently here as well.
Make 'em laugh, make 'em laugh.
Rudolf Nureyev's world, apparently. Again, it feels just a little bit Mad Libby, but not so much that you think it's not going to work. And not only does it works beautifully. And that theming isn't just slapped on for looks either, because there are several moments in the choreography where they start to throw a bit more of a modern style into it. They're not quite going full tap or jazz, but they're hearkening to it through the lens of ballet, and it makes for a really cool final product. Another note about the casting, the stepmother is played by a male dancer. And from what I read, this is apparently something that Prokofiev's ballet just lends itself to, one of the villains being portrayed by a person of different gender. And I gotta say, this is one of the more enjoyable stepmothers that I have seen thus far in this series. She doesn't have as much active stage time as the Stepsisters, but she makes an impact nonetheless. We do see multiple times where she and the Stepsisters are physically abusive to Cinderella, both in obvious and more abstract ways, but she's also got these moments where she comes off more as a flighty pageant mom. She's not pure evil, she's just dramatic. And because she's played by a man, she physically takes up more space than her scene partners, and that makes her more intimidating. Not to mention this super wide arc that she creates when she's dancing with these furs on her neck. She looks like Katie Nana from Mary Poppins fused with a helicopter. The Stepsisters get far more love as far as the choreography is concerned, in more ways than one. I need to give these two a spotlight because their style of dancing is so different from the other characters, and most of the time it's meant to look wobbly and awkward when they're trying to be graceful, because they clearly don't know what they're doing. But the way it's done still takes a tremendous amount of skill. Basically, these dancers have to be really good to look that bad. I do think that the Stepsisters are maybe loved on a little too much, though. Or rather, nothing about their antics really seems to change, so their scenes feel like they go on for longer than necessary. Like, I really feel their dance in the third act would have been a great excuse for them to, like, gloat to Cinderella about how fabulous the film shoot was and maybe embellish the truth of how they got to dance with the film star. But instead, they just play a long game of keep away with her. Which reminds me, I am very confused as to what this prop is and its significance. I mentioned before how it appears to be a bundle of fruit, mainly because the older stepsister grabs it off one of the food carts, but that is a guess at best. And I really don't understand why we have two whole dance sequences dedicated to people trying to steal it from one another. Cinderella didn't even touch this thing the night before, so I have no idea how she got a hold of it, and she's trying to keep her stepsisters from taking it. Just something that doesn't read very clearly without the dedicated synopsis. Similarly, I know that this set piece is meant to echo the clock that strikes midnight, along with these 12 dancers who move very robotically, but it's not actually a clock. It's just a tower of gears and scaffolding. It's very close to being a clock, but still feels very odd because it's missing a clock's most recognizable feature, the face. It's possible this is just another change meant for this specific interpretation, but again, it's hard to be sure on visuals alone. I should take a moment and actually talk about the music that Sergei Prokofiev composed for this ballet. But please take what I say with a grain of salt, because I have very limited experience on which to base what makes a good ballet score. To me, nothing can ever top the Nutcracker, and you cannot change my mind. So while I think this score is very prettily written, I also don't find it a particularly memorable one either. There are certain melodies that repeat and you can recognize them if you squint, but most of it is just kind of slow and musy, and a lot of the big numbers don't really have a lot of distinction between them. Overall, I just think it could have used some more variety in its makeup. Now that leads me into my next point, which is, yes, I do love this ballet, but there are certain parts of it that I could honestly live without. While I appreciate the big montage at the film studio at the beginning of the second act and just adding more to that classic Hollywood era flavor, I do think it overstays its welcome. It goes on for too long, it's not terribly relevant. The fully articulated not King Kong puppet is impressive and completely unnecessary. I'm also not entirely comfortable with the Pacific Island dancers trying to decide who to sacrifice to said puppet. However, you could make the argument that it's more to show satire because classic Hollywood made a lot of money off those kinds of stereotypes back in the day, and they're just showing that process in action. But you can't exactly say the same for the dancer at the Chinese opium den and her 6-inch talons. There's also the, thinly veiled Romani stereotype that they throw in just for a moment. We all know what they're going for, let's not hide it. This character did make me laugh though, because when they go to actually try the shoe on her, she does this little move like, "No way! You're not putting that ugly thing on my foot! I've got better things to do with my time!" I do realize that these issues kind of have a running theme, and I'm not going to ignore that. They are still there, and they should be criticized, but I'm also trying to take into account the weight that they bear on the performance as a whole, which ultimately isn't much. You could easily replace these elements with something not offensive or just completely cut them out entirely, and the rest of the show would still run the same. It would not change the story. And that clock on the wall is ticking, which means it's time to completely shift gears and talk about the visuals real quick. I am a bit surprised that while this adaptation is likely set in the 20s, most of the costumes aren't terribly period specific. And maybe that was done on purpose, because while this is a very specific setting that they're using, the original story is also timeless. That said, I am still very much in love with how the costumes were constructed, at least the ones for the lady dancers. Using Cinderella's work dress as an example, it looks like a very basic dress when she's standing still, but once she starts twirling around, you can see there is so much more fabric in her skirt than you first realized, and it creates these beautiful dramatic shapes around her. And the fancy outfit that she gets later from the director is incredibly glamorous, so beautiful. I love the gloves. I think they add so much to the silhouette, and the color is soft yet still manages to stand out from the rest of the palette around her. I don't know why. The Stepsisters are very color-coded in blue and pink, and while it's not the same shade, it does make my brain itch that Cinderella also wears pink at the film shoot. I also initially thought that her work dress and the Stepmother's dress looked too similar in certain light, but once the Stepmother gets her furs and hat, it does wonders to distinguish her. And I really wish that the film star wore his sparkly waistcoat for the whole show, because that's pretty much the only distinguishing feature he gets. In the third act, he's literally wearing the same thing as the mass of other dancers behind him, and you're only able to pick him out because of Charles Jude's beautiful head of hair. As far as sets, I really love how Cinderella's house is designed. It's so cavernous and just feels cold and hard to look at. This is definitely not a place where Cinderella feels welcome or comfortable. Maybe there was love here once upon a time, but not anymore. I also realized that I haven't mentioned anything about Cinderella's father yet, because we have another instance of him still being alive, but there really is not much to mention. He's a drunk and he's a pushover. That is the full extent of his personality. He's not here to help, he's not here to hurt. He's just here to be another example of how completely dysfunctional Cinderella's family is. So does this ballet have its shortcomings? Yes. Does it have things that I'm just lukewarm about? Also yes. Does it also have incredibly gorgeous things and a very creative reimagining of the story as a whole? Also, yes. For me, this is a case where the whole package is greater than the sum of its parts. Rudolf Nureyev was clearly a visionary in his field. To me, this is such a unique marriage of ideas, and he pulls it off like it's been that way since the beginning. I am heartbroken that he was taken from us so soon, but I will definitely be looking more into his work. Same for Sylvie Guillem. She is an absolute dream to watch and an excellent choice for this role in the show. And with that, thank you so much for joining me at the theater today. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun putting this episode together. You can show your support for this video by giving it a like, and if you're interested in seeing me talk about other Cinderella-related media, there will be links to the playlist on the end screen and in the description. And if you'd like to see new episodes when they come out, there is a handy little tool for that. It's called the subscribe button. But for now, I think I'm about to turn into a pumpkin, so I will see you next time. Bye. Or should I say, au revoir? Stop speaking French, Emily. Just stop.
Now, wasn't that a cultural show?